What's up, guys? New York Sports Hub here, and today in this video I'm going to be doing the most overrated and most underrated player on every single MLB team. So I'm going to go through all 30 MLB teams, and I'm going to tell you which player is most overrated and which player is most underrated. So let's get this started. So starting off with the Baltimore Orioles, their most overrated player is Chris Davis. Not really much players to choose from on the Orioles because the Orioles are so bad, so I decided to pick Chris Davis because he's been so terrible the past 2 seasons. He's their most overrated player. Their most underrated player is Trey Mancini. Trey Mancini's been a beast the past 2 seasons. Had an amazing year in 2019. 2018, he kind of looked like a bust. Came back in 2018, had a fantastic year. Trey Mancini, once again, does have stage 3 colon cancer, so prayers up to him. I hope he has a speedy recovery. So he won't be playing this year, but I mean, Trey Mancini is the most underrated player on the Orioles. Moving over to the Blue Jays, their most overrated player, I'm going to catch some heat for this, but their most overrated player is going to be Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. really disappointed me. I thought he would be a much better player than he was last season. He still has a lot more years to go. He's still very young. I still think he's has a lot of talent, but in my opinion, he's their most overrated player right now. And the most underrated player, in my opinion, is Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. didn't play a full season due to injuries, but when he was on the field, he was a beast. Moving over to the Red Sox, their most overrated player, I'm going to catch some heat for this, but their most overrated player is Chris Sale. Chris Sale won't pitch at all in 2020 due to Tommy John surgery, and he just hasn't been good since 2018. Chris Sale's overrated, in my opinion. And their most underrated player is Alex Verdugo. They acquired him off the Mookie Betts deal, so I'm pretty sure a lot of Red Sox fans won't like him, but in my opinion, he'll be a stud. He's their most underrated player. Moving over to the Rays, their most overrated player is Kevin Kiermaier. Kevin Kiermaier might have a great glove in center field, but he just can't hit, and I think Kevin Kiermaier is really overrated. Their most underrated player is going to be Yoshi Tsutsugo. They picked him off of Japan during the offseason. You don't really hear much people talking about Yoshi Tsutsugo. I think he's going to be a really good player. Moving over to the Yankees, my personal favorite team, their most overrated player. I hate to say it, he's one of my favorite players. That's going to be Gary Sanchez. Don't really need to explain myself here. He's a terrible defensive catcher, and he's very inconsistent. Their most underrated player is going to be Mike Tauchman. Mike Tauchman's a player that's pretty popular in the Yankees community. He's called the Sock Man because he socks the baseball out of the park. Mike Tauchman, once again, didn't play the full season due to an injury, but in my opinion, Mike Tauchman will come back and probably be one of the best position players on the Yankees this season. Moving over to the Detroit Tigers, their most overrated player is Matthew Boyd. A lot of people consider Matthew Boyd to be a really good pitcher. I just don't see it. He had a sub 4 ERA last year. Matthew Boyd, in my opinion, is overrated. Their most underrated player, although, is going to be C.J. Cron. They picked him off the offseason. C.J. Cron's been a really good hitting first baseman ever since he joined the league. Moving over to the Royals, their most overrated player is Alex Gordon. Alex Gordon, once again, might have a pretty good glove in left field, but once again, he's kind of an average hitter. I don't really think Alex Gordon is that good. He's their most overrated player. And their most underrated player might be the second most underrated player in the league. It's going to be Whit Merrifield. Whit Merrifield has led the major leagues in hits the past 2 seasons. He's super underrated. He's their most underrated player. Moving over to the White Sox, their most overrated player is Tim Anderson. Tim Anderson, once again, is a really cool player. He's all cool with the bat flips, and he has to let kids play. But in my opinion, Tim Anderson is a little bit overrated. I feel like a lot of MLB fans consider Tim Anderson to be like a top 10, top 5 shortstop in the league. I just don't see it. He's a good player, but he's definitely not top 10. And their most underrated player is Jose Abreu. All this guy does is hits, and I feel like you don't really hear much people talking about him. He's their most underrated player. Moving over to the Cleveland Indians, the most overrated player is Roberto Perez. Roberto Perez might be great defensively behind the plate. He's a pretty good defensive catcher, but he just can't hit. He had a pretty good offensive year in 2019 where he hit 24 home runs, but before that he was a 170 hitter. I just don't think Roberto Perez is that good. For the Indians' most underrated player, it's going to be Oscar Mercado. Oscar Mercado had a great rookie season for the Indians. Once again, another player you don't really hear much people talking about because the Indians have stars on that team like Lindor, Ramirez, and Santana. Oscar Mercado is a really underrated player in my opinion, and he is the Indians' most underrated player. Moving over to the Minnesota Twins, their most overrated player is Jose Barrios. Jose Barrios, in my opinion, I thought was going to be like a Cy Young candidate in 2019. He really disappointed me. Jose Barrios is, once again, one of the more disappointing players of 2019. I don't think he's as good. I don't really think he's an ace-type pitcher. I think he's like a solid 2 or a solid 3. I don't think Jose Barrios is an ace-type pitcher. He's their most overrated player. And for the Twins' most underrated player is Jorge Polanco. Jorge Polanco, I think, in my opinion, will be one of the most best offensive shortstops in Major League Baseball this season. And boy, the Twins are going to score a lot of runs this year. Moving on to the Seattle Mariners, their most overrated player is Yusei Kikuchi. And Yusei Kikuchi was supposed to be a really good pitcher when they came back from Japan, and he came back to the major leagues and was a terrible player. And he really wasn't that good for them. He is their most overrated player. For the Mariners' most underrated player, it's going to be Dan Vogelbach. Dan Vogelbach doesn't hit high for average, but he has a ton of power, and he's kind of like a miniature Babe Ruth. He crushes the ball. Moving on to the LA Angels, their most overrated player is going to be Justin Upton. Justin Upton, the past 2 years, has not hit for a high average and has not been able to stay on the field. He's definitely not the same player he used to be. Justin Upton is the Angels' most overrated player. For the most underrated player, it's going to be a meme on Twitter, David Fletcher. David Fletcher's a pesky little player, and he's the Angels' best player. He's a solid leadoff man. Moving over to the Texas Rangers, rather, the former Cleveland Indian pitcher, the most overrated player on the Rangers, I hate to say it, but it's Corey Kluber. Corey Kluber, once again, didn't pitch really that much in 2019 due to injury. Corey Kluber, in my opinion, is a little bit overrated. For the Rangers, most underrated player is going to be Shin-Soo Choo. Shin-Soo Choo might be an old player, but I don't really think you hear much people talking about Shin-Soo Choo. He's been a really solid hitter the past couple of years. Moving over to the Oakland A's, their most overrated player is the other Chris Davis with a K, Chris Davis. All Chris Davis really do is hit homers, that's it. Chris Davis really isn't that great of a hitter besides hitting home runs. He is their most overrated player. For the A's, most underrated player is going to be their first baseman, Matt Olson. If Matt Olson if he would have played the full season, he would have hit 50 home runs in the season. You don't really hear much people talking about Matt Olson. In my opinion, he's probably the best first baseman in the American League. He's a beast. He's their most underrated player. Moving on to the Houston Astros, their most overrated player is Yuli Gurriel. There's a lot of talented players in the Astros, even though they bang trash cans. Yuli Gurriel is the most overrated player because there's not really much players to choose from there, so he is their most overrated player. For the Astros, the most underrated player is going to be Michael Brantley. Michael Brantley is so underrated. He's been so underrated throughout his career. He was always underrated when he was with the Indians. He had a really good season with the Astros, and he was one of the best pickups of the 2019 offseason. He's the Astros' most underrated player. Moving over to the Arizona Diamondbacks, moving over to the National League, their most overrated player is Jake Lamb. Jake Lamb used to be a pretty solid player back in 2016, 2015, around that time. But ever since then, he's kind of been always injured all the time, and he hasn't been the same player. He's their most overrated player. For the Diamondbacks, most underrated player is the most underrated player in Major League Baseball, Eduardo Escobar. You need to know this guy's name. He's a beast. He's their most underrated player. For the Padres' most overrated player, going to go with Will Myers. Will Myers was supposed to be one of the best players. He was a number one prospect when he was with the Rays, I think around 2013, 2012. He was supposed to be one of the best players in Major League Baseball, and he really hasn't panned out. In my opinion, he's a bust. He's their most overrated player. For the Padres' most underrated player is going to be Chris Paddock. Chris Paddock was a rookie pitcher last year, had a fantastic season. I never heard of this guy before this year, and I think he'll be a really good pitcher in 2020. Moving over to the Giants, and their most overrated player is going to be Brandon Crawford. A lot of people consider Brandon Crawford to be a top-tier shortstop. He's just not the same player he used to be. He is their most overrated player. And for the Giants' most underrated player is going to be their rookie, Mikey Yastrzemski. He's the grandson of Red Sox legend Carl Yastrzemski. I think Mikey Yastrzemski will turn out to be a really solid player. He's the Giants' most underrated player. Moving over to the Colorado Rockies, not a lot of players to choose from here because they have so many good players, but their most overrated player I'm going to have to choose is Ian Desmond. Kind of like Kevin Kiermaier, plays a really good outfield, has a good glove, but he just can't really hit. He's their most overrated player. For the Rockies' most underrated player, I'm going to go with David Dahl. David Dahl joined the league back in 2018, and he's been a really solid hitter. David Dahl is the Rockies' most underrated player. Moving over to the Dodgers, the Dodgers have so many players who are really good. You'd probably expect me to pick Clayton Kershaw here. I still think Clayton Kershaw is really good. I don't think he's overrated. I think he's an overrated playoff pitcher, but not in the regular season. I think the Dodgers' most overrated player is Kenley Jansen. Had a great year in 2017, but ever since that, he hasn't really been good. He's been blowing a lot of saves, and in my opinion, he's the most Dodgers overrated player. And for the Dodgers' most underrated player is going to be their catcher, Will Smith. The Dodgers have so many players who are so good, it's hard to choose, so I have to choose Will Smith here. Had a really good rookie season. Moving over to the Pirates, their most overrated player is Chris Archer. Chris Archer was a good pitcher with the Rays, and ever since he joined the Pirates, he has just been so bad. He is their most overrated player. For the Pirates' most underrated player is going to be another rookie. It's going to be their outfielder, Brian Reynolds. You haven't really heard of Brian Reynolds because he played for such a bad Pirates team, but I think once the Pirates get better, I think Brian Reynolds will be a really good player. And he's the most underrated player in my opinion. For the Cincinnati Reds, I'm going to get some heat on this one as well. Their most overrated player is going to be Joey Votto. Mind you, Joey Votto might be a Hall of Famer, but he's just not the same player he used to be. He's been kind of like a boring hitter the past 2 years. He doesn't really hit for power anymore. Joey Votto, I hate to say it, he's their most overrated Reds player right now. For the Reds' most underrated player, this guy actually might be the most underrated player. It's going to be Eugenio Suarez. The dude hit 49 home runs last year. He's a beast. He's their most underrated player. Moving over to the Chicago Cubs, the most overrated player is going to be Craig Kimbrell. Craig Kimbrell didn't really get signed till the end of the year, but when he went to the Cubs, he was just so bad. Craig Kimbrell is the most overrated player on the Cubs. For the Cubs' most underrated player, once again, not really much players to choose from here, so I just chose Wilson Contreras. He's a really good catcher. He is their most underrated player. Moving over to the Brewers, their most overrated player is Ryan Braun. Ryan Braun, once again, might be maybe a borderline Hall of Famer, but I don't really see it. I think Ryan Braun's overrated. For the Brewers' most underrated player is going to be another rookie on this list. It's going to be Keston Hiura. The dude rakes at the plate. I think Keston Hiura will be a really solid player throughout his career. He's the most underrated player on the Brewers. Moving over to the Cardinals, their most overrated player is going to be Yadier Molina. Wow, I'm going to get some heat for this one as well. I think Yadier Molina is a really good player overall throughout his career, but he's getting old. He's not the same player he used to be. A lot of people consider him to be like a top 10 catcher in the league. He's definitely not a top 10 catcher. He's not the same player he used to be. Yadier Molina is the Cardinals' most overrated player. For the Cardinals' most underrated player, going to go with their ace starting pitcher, Jack Flaherty. Jack Flaherty had an ERA under 1 in the second half of the season. He's nasty, and he could be a sleeper pick for the 2020 Cy Young. He's their most underrated player. Moving over to the Miami Marlins, and I know he's wearing a Rays uniform, but he just got traded to the Marlins this offseason. So the Marlins' most overrated player is going to be Jesus Aguilar. Aguilar had a monster year in 2018, where I think he had over 30 homers, but came back in 2019, had a really disappointing year with the Brewers and the Rays. Jesus Aguilar is their most overrated player. The Marlins' most underrated player, it's another young stud in Major League Baseball, going to be Brian Anderson. Once again, not a lot of people have heard of Brian Anderson because he plays for the Marlins. They're not a very popular team, but Brian Anderson's a really good player. He's the most underrated player going into 2020. For the Philadelphia Phillies, their most overrated player is going to be Rhys Hoskins. Rhys Hoskins had a fantastic rookie year back in 2018, and he really disappointed me in 2019. Didn't have a great season, and he's their most overrated player. And for the Philly most underrated player, and a lot of people think this guy's overrated, I don't think so. I think he's really, really good. Their most underrated player is going to be Bryce Harper. He's one of the more hated players in the game because of his attitude, but I think Bryce Harper's really good. I think he's their most underrated player. For the New York Mets, the most overrated player is Noah Syndergaard. Noah Syndergaard has not been the same pitcher since 2016 when did he win Rookie of the Year, but he was really good in 2016, and ever since that, he's really struggled with injuries and has not been the same pitcher he used to be. And in my opinion, he's their most overrated player. I hate to say it, but he's their most overrated player. So for the Mets' most underrated player, we're going to go with Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil is a really pesky player. I think in the beginning of the year, he was hitting around 350. Jeff McNeil is a really good player, in my opinion. He is their most underrated player. For the Washington Nationals, their most overrated player, I'm going to go with Howie Kendrick here. Not a lot of players to choose from for the Nationals. I think that all their players are really good. But if I had to choose an overrated player, I'd go with Howie Kendrick because, once again, he was really good in the World Series against the Astros. But he might be overhyped by some fans because of his World Series performance. But I think he's the most overrated player on the Nationals. For the Nationals' most underrated player, I'm going to go with Adam Eaton. Adam Eaton's, once again, a really solid player. He's a pesky hitter. He's a typical number 2 hitter. And I think Adam Eaton's really good. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. He is the most underrated player. For the final team on this list, for the Atlanta Braves, their most overrated player is going to be Mike Foltynewicz. Mike Foltynewicz had a really good season in 2018 and came back in 2019, really disappointed me. Also had a really bad start in Game 5 of the NLDS against the Cardinals, where they lost, where they gave up 10 runs in the first inning. Mike Foltynewicz is kind of one of the more disappointing pitchers in the league last year. He is their most overrated player. For the final player on this list, the Atlanta Braves' most underrated player is going to be Ozzie Albies. Ozzie Albies is a really pesky player. He gets on base. I think he led the league in hits in 2017. Ozzie Albies is their most underrated player for the Braves, and I'm a big fan of Ozzie Albies. He's their most underrated player. So that is going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you agree with my list, put it down in the comments below and tell you if you like the list. If you disagree with the list, put it down in the comments below what your most overrated and underrated player for each team would be. So